preach tonight from Psalms chapter number 145. Verse number 1, the Bible said, I will extol thee, my God, O King, and I will bless thy name forever and ever. Every day will I bless thee, and I will praise thy name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall praise thy works to another, and shall declare thy mighty acts. I will speak to the glorious honor of thy majesty and thy wondrous works. And men shall speak of thy might, of thy terrible acts. I will declare thy greatness. They shall abundantly utter the memory of the great goodness, and shall sing of thy righteousness. The Lord is great, gracious, and full of compassion, slow to anger, and of great mercy. The Lord is good to all, and his tender mercies are over all his works. David here, just a few verses of this, and the rest of the chapter just goes on with a lot of the same. I mean, David was thankful. David was, he wanted God to know that he thought God was great. And you know, little kids, they pray sometimes over they say their grace, and it's God is great, God is good. The children know God is great. Now, I know God's great, and you know God's great, but the majority of the world don't have a clue the goodness and the greatness of God. I don't think they probably did in the days that David lived in. I'd say there was less people thanking God and praising God than there was that were praising him and thanking him. But David started off here in the 145th chapter. And I want to drop down here to verse number 3 tonight. Ain't no way I can cover all this, but I just want to hit a few highlights that stuck out to me in this chapter. He said in verse 3, he said, "Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable." You know what David was saying? He said, God is so great, and he is so wonderful, he is so marvelous, that you can't search and find the end of his greatness. Our scientists today and astrologers and different people, they're always studying outer space, and they always looking to find new stars and new planets and new galaxies and all these things. And every once in a while they'll say, we found something that we never seen before. Space, outer space, I guess is so vast that I don't know if they'll ever get it studied out. And I look up into outer space and I say there's a star and there's the moon, and that's my knowledge of outer space. It don't take me long to search out what I know, but scientists and astrologers and people, they're trying to find more and more. They're trying to find life on other planets. They're continually searching, but they can't find the end of it, because there is no end of it. It just goes on and on and on. And that's what David said here. He said the Lord is great and greatly to be praised. And through all generations, his greatness is unsearchable. You'll never find the vastness of God's greatness, because it is just every time you think you got God figured out a little bit, he does something else. You say, well, I never saw that before. Listen, that's God. He is greatly to be praised. We are to be lifting our hands tonight before heaven and praising the name of our God. He said the generations in verse 4. I preached this morning that fathers' obligation was to tell their children when they asked about the things of God, to tell them the things that God has done. When they ask in Joshua, they ask about the stones. So what does this mean? And he said, you tell your children what these things mean. That it was when God dried up the Jordan River for us to walk over on dry land. He said, you tell your children. Well, here in the book of Psalms, he said, one generation shall praise thy works to another. He's not talking about fathers to children here. He's talking about generations of people talking to other generations of people. And sometimes I get to talking with my wife and other folks, some of them our age, some of them older, and you get to talking about how church was 50 years ago, 60 years ago. There's hardly no comparison with the way things were and the way things are. And the Bible said here, he said, for one generation to praise and the works and declare his works to another generation. I think my generation dropped the ball when it comes to this. I mean, hey, up to my time, up through my dad's generation, they folks told about God. They told about God's mercy. They talked about God's grace. They talked about the goodness of God, the greatness of God, the abilities of God to bless in time of trouble. They opened their mouth and they talked about God. But then my generation come along, and most of the time we don't tell anybody about God. It's just like, hey, I've got it figured out, and you figure it out for yourself. God is here for everybody, and there's no point in me telling you what He's done for me, because it wouldn't do you any good anyway. I want to differ with you. If you'll tell people what God has done for you, it may help them tremendously in time of trouble. Our testimony is it's like gold. You can't give it enough. I see a lot of people in the Bible that you could talk about, kings and priests and different ones, even prophets, some of them, how they died, they left this world, and God wasn't pleased with them. Adab and Abihu, they went into the tabernacle to offer strange fire to God, and God sent fire from heaven and burnt them right there inside the tabernacle. They were priests or preachers, if you will, but God wasn't pleased with them. And they drug them out of there and took them out to bury them, and God told Aaron, don't go to the funeral and don't shed any tears. That's a tall order when you got two sons just got killed. But basically, I think what God was saying is they got what was coming to them. And I know that sounds bad. I'm glad that we're living under the day of grace. I probably got what was coming to me a long time ago. But I'm glad that what I got that wasn't what I deserved to come to me, but it was the grace and the mercy of Almighty God. It was Him loving the world so much He sent His only begotten Son to die on the cross of Calvary that I might have life and have it more abundantly. He said, one generation shall praise thy works to another. You ever talk to any old timers that was been around for a lot of years, maybe more than you, and they talk about how God used to, how God did? And I talked to people before, one lady in particular that we used to go to church with. She said, first time I ever went to a doctor was when I was going to get married, and back then you had to go have a blood test. I don't even think you have to do that anymore. Sister Carol and I did, and I don't know when it stopped, but I'm pretty sure you don't do that anymore. But she said we had to go have a blood test, and she said I walked into a doctor's office for the first time in my life. She said when we got sick, my daddy prayed. When something happened at our house, my dad and mom got on their knees before God. Listen, if people would get back to praying, and I'm not telling you to cancel all your doctor's appointment. I've got some coming up. But I want to tell you something. If we would pray more, we would have to see the doctor less. God can do, and this lady was telling us these things, and that's what she was doing. Her generation was praising the works of God to another generation. She let me know that God can take care of you without a doctor's help sometimes. Sometimes I think God uses doctors. I used to just preach against them. Hey, if you went to a doctor, you didn't have any faith where I was preaching that. But I've learned that sometimes God uses doctors. I told my doctor not too long ago, I said, I want to thank you. He said, for what? I said, you've kept me alive for 20 years. He said, it ain't been me, it was God. He just used me. I'm just His servant. I'm just an instrument in the hands of God, and God's what's kept you alive for 20 years. He said, I had very little to do with it. Listen, that's a good doctor when they do that, but most of them don't even acknowledge that God exists. Sometimes God uses doctors and different ways to help and to render the kind of help that we need. Sometimes it's not going to be miraculous. Anytime you're taking another breath, it's miraculous. But sometimes God uses different avenues to do things. But the psalmist said one generation needs to tell the next generation what God can do.
Amen.
Most folks today are so busy praising their own self, they ain't got time to praise God. That's the truth. We live in such a boastful time, such a time when a lot of preachers strutting around like banny roosters. People get up and sing, and they all think they can sing better than somebody else. And I mean, teachers teach, and they say, man, I tell you, I'm a good teacher. I'm a great teacher. And I've heard other people teach, and they might as well sit down. They can't teach at all. Our arms should be triple jointed where we're patting ourselves on the back all the time. But David didn't say that. He said, let us praise one generation, tell another generation, not what you can do, but what God did. Amen. When the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea, it wasn't Moses, it was God. Amen. And people could say, well, we heard how Moses parted the sea. No, Moses didn't part the sea, God did. Moses would be quick to tell you that. When the Jordan River rolled back, Joshua didn't do that. The priest that was bearing the Ark of the Covenant that stepped down on the edge of the water and it rolled back, they didn't do that. God did that. And when they, the generation of Joshua needed to tell the next generation, and they needed to tell the next generation, and on it goes until people never forget about God and what He did. Apparently somebody was doing it. Judges chapter number 6. We find a man named Gideon. And Gideon was a man that was under Midianite oppression. Yeah. Why were they under Midianite oppression? Because they forgot God. Amen. It's just plain and simple. You forget God and then trouble comes your way. And you know what? You've got nobody to blame but yourself. I know sometimes, poor old Job, he didn't do anything wrong. He still had oppression. But that's a different thing. But Gideon was in a time when Israel was under Midianite oppression. And if they caught Israel doing anything with their crops, they'd just come and destroy them or come and steal them. Israel could have nothing. They could do nothing. And Gideon was out behind the threshing floor, threshing wheat in the middle of the night, in the darkness, under cover of darkness because of the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord came to him and began to carry on a conversation with him. And Gideon asked a question in verse number 13 of chapter number 6 of the book of Judges. And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? Listen, when problems arise, it's easier for me to blame somebody else. It's easier for me to blame God for all my problems than it is to confess my sins and repent and ask God to help me and understand and realize that my problem is probably just that. My problem. I was the one that made it. I created it. And now I've got to live with it. God told them. It would take a while, but I could probably go back and find the verses or some, at least a bunch of them, where God told Moses, He told Joshua, He told the children of Israel, He told the judges, He told everybody, if you turn your back on me, if you don't serve me, if you don't worship me, if you don't live for me, I'll cause problems to come to you. Amen. And what did they do? They said, you don't really mean that. God ain't going to do nothing to us. We're the children of Israel. We're special people. Well, they were special people, but they wasn't that special. I'm a special person tonight too, but I'm not that special. And neither are you. Don't ever think that God is not going to get your attention if you turn your back on Him. Man, I want to tell you something. He'll jerk your leash so hard that you'll think your neck's broke. Don't think He won't. Listen, problems come up, and Gideon's question was, if God be with us, if the Lord's with us, why is all this stuff befalling us? Why is this all come down on our whole world's caved in on us? Now you tell me why that is. If we'd confess, God can reverse a lot of things. Sometimes He does. I'm not going to give you a percentage of times He does, but I know sometimes He don't. Because when Nathan went to David, he said, you're not going to die, but the sword's going to be laid at your sword from now on. That sword was still laying at David's door when he took his dying breath. There was probably a lot of days in David's life that he just wished he would die because of that sword. Listen, God's not always going to reverse what you've caused for yourself, but sometimes He will. And in this case, He did. He said, if the Lord be with us, then why is all this befallen us? And where are His miracles which our fathers told us about? Saying, did the Lord not bring us up from Egypt? Now Gideon said, okay, if the Lord's with us, why is this befallen us? And where is all the miracles? You know where the miracles are in most of our lives? They're left at our prayer closet where we didn't go pray. You see, we need to set aside things that we want to do and start doing what God says to do, and then we may find some of those miracles. And Gideon here, he said, man, I'm out here in the dark working in the midnight shift just so the Midianites won't steal what I got or destroy what I got. And if God's with us, why is this happening? You know, Gideon, it's almost funny. I mean, it would be if it wasn't so serious. But he said, our fathers told us about the miracles. You see, when Joshua said, build this stone, set these stones up, and when your children ask, you tell them. That was the book right before Judges. And so Joshua told the people to do that, and apparently they had been doing that, at least some. I guess they left out the part where God was going to get you if you didn't live for Him. But Gideon went on here after he said that, where's the miracles that did not God bring us up out of Egypt? And now down here in the last part of this verse, he said, but now the Lord hath forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. I want to tell you something. Gideon never stopped to realize that it wasn't God that did the forsaking. It was the children of Israel that had forsaken God. And when you forsake God, you're headed for trouble. There's no way you're going to have anything except trouble in your life when you forsake God. Gideon said, why has God forsaken us? Why has He's forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites? No, He didn't. You forsook Him and you delivered your own self into the hands of the Midianites. Why does the devil bother me all the time? Well, that could be a good thing, because if he's bothering you, that means he don't have you. Somebody said, the devil never bothers me. I said, apparently he's already got you. I tell you, I don't go through a day when that rascal don't come around bothering me. I'm telling you, if you're trying to serve God, trying to live for God, you might as well get ready for a battle, because you're going to be in one. But if we forsake God, and then trouble comes, we can't sit back and say, Lord, why did you do that to me? He might talk back to you and say, why did you do that to me? When the disciples, Peter and James and John, went up on the mountain of Transfiguration, and they saw a vision of Moses and Elijah coming down to Jesus, and they said, Lord, it's good for us to be here. Let us build 3 tabernacles, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And they heard a voice from heaven said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. You listen to Him. Next thing they did, they hit the dirt. And when they raised their head up again, there wasn't nobody there but Jesus. Amen. Listen, you might hear a voice when you start saying, Lord, why'd you do this to me? You might hear a voice saying, why'd you do this to me? I didn't do this to you. You did this to your own self. Listen, so many times we're our own worst enemy. We bring things upon ourselves by the life we live, by the company we keep. And I've said so many times that you cannot keep company with sinners and live for Jesus. It is impossible to do. You cannot do it. I realize we got sinners in our families. But I want to tell you something. When my sinful family members come to my house, they know to respect me and respect my God. Amen. And if they don't want to do that, they can go to somebody else's house. I'm not going to put up with it. Amen. I mean, I'm not standing here saying I'm better than anybody else or I'm big and bad and all that stuff. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is this is my castle. And when you come in my castle, you'll live by my rules. Gideon said, why did the Lord do this? He didn't. They did. Gideon never stopped to think who is really responsible for this. Maybe he just never, maybe he didn't know. Maybe he was too young. Maybe it was so long back in his life. And I don't know what Gideon's age was exactly, but maybe it was long, maybe it'd been a long time since he'd heard the stories about the miracle. But he asked the angel this question. And the thing that I said was almost funny, if it wasn't so serious. The angel told him what the problem was. He said, you want to know why God has forsaken you? I tell you what you do. Go out and kill your father's fatted calf or his ox, and then go and tear down the altar of Baal that you worship at. Now see, this is all. They was not to worship Baal, but that's what they were worshiping and blaming God for their problems. Yeah. And the angel said, go and tear down the altar of Baal and build an altar for God and sacrifice the ox on that altar. And he said, then I'm going to tell you how to fix this situation. And the next morning, when after Gideon had burned the altar of Baal and killed the ox, and some of the people of the community came and got Gideon's dad and said, why has your son tore down our altar? We need to tear down some altars. Yes. Some altars to Baal. Yes. Gideon's blaming God for his problems when the problem was all Gideon and his father and his family and his community. They were all the ones that was responsible, but he was saying, why is God doing this to us? How many times you've been there? Sometimes we forget what we've done against God, and we just think it's Him doing something against us. Listen, God's not your enemy. He said, Jesus told them there in the last chapter of Matthew, about the last verse, I guess. He said, lo, I'm with you always. I'll go with you even to the end. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. And yet when trouble comes, we say, Lord, you forsook me. No, He didn't. I guarantee you, if you start checking up, you'll find out that Jesus is still going the same way He was. You're the one that took a detour. We can't make it like that. The Bible tells us in 2 Chronicles chapter 15, verse that I became acquainted with years ago. And it's one of the few verses in the Old Testament I can remember the chapter, book, and verse. 2 Chronicles chapter 15 and verses 1 and 2. The Bible said, Azariah the prophet went out to meet King Asa when he came back. And Azariah had this to say to Asa. He said when he came out to meet him, he said, the Lord is with you while you be with Him. And you know what that tells me? If you're not with Him, He's not with you. Amen. Like I said, you're the one that turned off. He's still going the right way. He's still going the way He was going. And if you're not with Him anymore, it's because that you're not with Him, not because He's not with you. He went on and he said, and if you seek Him, He'll be found of you. If you seek Him. People say, I want to find the Lord, I just don't want to seek Him. Azariah told Asa, if you seek God, you'll find God.
Amen. Preach it.
And the last part of that said, but if you forsake Him, He will forsake you.
Amen.
You want to know why you've been forsaken and cast down? Because of something that you did. It wasn't God, it was you.
Amen.
And it might be time for you to stand up and own the situation. It might be time for you to go to God and say, look here, I realize now I made a mistake. I messed up, and I know that life ain't never going to be good for me anymore until I get this thing taken care of and get this situation corrected. And then I know that you and me can have fellowship again.
Amen.
I've seen so many people in my life. They want to live for God, but they want to hobnob with the world. And I see it on a daily basis, just about. They say I'm a Christian. They say I read my Bible. They say I pray. But they can't get away from the worldly-minded people. And I want to ask you something. How can you hang around with worldly people and pray very much? Because I'll tell you something. If you pray, God will tell you to get away from them.
Amen.
I promise you He will.
Yeah, preach it.
How can you blame God because you don't have any spirit about you anymore when you're the one that smothered the spirit out?
Amen.
There's a song said the flames flickered, but the fire ain't gone out. It ain't gone out, but it's down flickering so low you think it's out. But it's not God's fault. He's not the one that did the forsaking. You can't run with people that don't care anything about your God. You can't run with them and still care about your God. You can't do it. First thing you know, you'll be taking on their God. You'll be taking on their ways. You'll be taking on their actions. You'll be acting just exactly like they are. And then you'll be wondering, why in the world am I having all these problems? Because just like Azariah told Asa, you forsake God, He'll forsake you. Listen, sometimes we're the ones that's doing the forsaking, and we're wanting to blame God for something that we did, something that we're guilty of. I'm going to tell you something. We need to get back to doing back into the 3rd verse, this great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and His greatness is unsearchable. We need to get back to that day.
Amen.
Drop down with me to verse number 8 in Psalms 145. He said, the Lord is gracious and full of compassion. Don't that sound like a loving God? He said He loved the world so much that He gave His only begotten Son. We was a miserable lot. Not was, we still are. We are a miserable lot. But yet God loved us so much that He gave the best thing that heaven had to possibly offer, and He sent Him to die on a cross. And the Bible said it was a curse to hang on a tree, and that's exactly where Jesus hung, just because of you and me, because of the sins of the world. And He said the Lord is gracious and He's full of compassion. And then He finished up, He said, He's slow to anger. I'm glad for that, aren't you? Man, if He wasn't slow to anger, I wouldn't even be here tonight. I can promise you that. Somebody say, where's Brother Dave? Oh, he's been dead for years because God got angry. Finally got tired of fooling with Him. This is we'd all. And you say, preacher, you mean you're like that? Yeah, and you are too. That's just the way we are. We're a miserable bunch of people, but God is still... The psalmist here in verse 8 said the Lord is gracious. He's got grace. I mean, there's a songwriter wrote the song in one of the hymn books that said there's grace for every need.
Amen.
Grace for you, grace for me. There's grace, grace. God is so full of grace. He's gracious. The psalmist said He's gracious and He's full of compassion. You know what that means? He's full of compassion. It means He loves us. When you've got compassion on somebody, remember this story about the man that fell among thieves on the Jericho road. The priest passed by and the Levite passed by, and then the Samaritan came and had compassion and set him on his own beast, When you have compassion, you see, you put yourself out to try to help somebody else. That's compassion. And the psalmist here said, and he's slow to anger. He got full of passion, slow to anger, and of great mercy. Last part of that verse said he's of great mercy. Aren't you glad of that? The mercy of God is the only reason why that I can still stand and claim that I can do anything for God. In this flesh dwelleth no good thing, and anything that's in me that's any good at all is what God has put in there by His marvelous grace and His mercy. That's all I've got to claim. I cannot claim me for anything. You say, what did you do? I didn't do nothing. God did. How did you do that? I didn't do that. God did. Man, I'm going to tell you something. People today, we especially these big preachers, they wear their $2,000 suits, drive their $100,000 cars. And one preacher, several years ago, had a doghouse that was air conditioned. Yeah. I mean, they got the money. How do they get people to follow them? I don't know. I don't know how they do it. Apparently, they're not doing what I'm doing because I can't get hardly anybody to follow me.
Appreciate it, brother.
I've never had a problem getting run over by people following me. I might get stampeded by people leaving where I'm at. But listen, that people, they're so full of themselves. If you want to pardon the expression, but that's what they are. They're so full of themselves. They think they can do everything and nobody else can do nothing. But he said God is gracious, full of mercy. Man, I'm so thankful for that today. Verse 9 said the Lord is good to all.
Amen.
All, A-double-L. That's not a real long word, but it's got a great big meaning. He said the Lord is good to all. You ever had anybody tell you the Lord ain't really good to me? Yes, He is. He could be. He would be. He can be. If God's not good to you, then it's because that you're not serving Him. You're not living for Him. You're not trusting Him. You're not praising Him. You're not accepting the fact that He's full of grace and compassion and mercy and slow to anger and all those things that we have been talking about tonight. And you don't accept those things and you reject those things. And then you wonder why when we say the Lord's good to all, you say, well, all but me. I'm glad He's good to me. I'm glad I'm part of all, because I tell you something, I couldn't make it. I couldn't make it a day. I couldn't make it a minute. I couldn't make it a second without God and His grace and His mercy and His compassion. I mean, I tell you, I'd be up the creek without a paddle. But the psalmist said the Lord's good to all. Everybody. You know, when Saul was searching for David, trying to kill him, God was good to David. He hid him from Saul. Yes. But He was also good to Saul because there was twice at least that David could have killed him. I mean, right there in his sleep, and he could have been gone and nobody wouldn't even know who done it. But God was good to him. Yeah. He was good to anybody you want to pick out in the Bible. He's good to Hezekiah. When the king came down and said, we're going to come take this place, God said, no, I've got an angel to take care of you. Killed 185,000 in one night. Was He good to Hezekiah? I say He was. Was He good to the woman at the well that came and she was just a harlot and a sinner, black as coal, and she came to where Jesus was and she didn't find Jesus. Jesus knew she was coming and He sat there on the well and waited on her. Why? Because He's gracious. He's full of mercy. He's compassionate. And He's good to all. And after her conversation with him, she said, I perceive that you're a prophet. And she went running through the city saying, come see a man that's told me everything that I ever done. He changed her life because He's good to all. The blind man by the wayside begging. Jesus came by, gave him his sight because he's good to all. Man laid by the gate for 38 years by the pool and couldn't get anybody to help him get in the water. But Jesus came by and said, don't worry about the water. I've got grace, I'm gracious, I've got mercy, and I've got love. And just take your bed up and go on about your business. Because he's good to all. He was good to the lepers. People wouldn't even, if you saw a leper coming, you'd run for your life. Jesus saw a leper coming, he ran for their life. And he ran right up on them. People saying, don't touch him. Jesus said, hey, I got this. Why? Because he's good to all. Amen. He's good to everybody. He was good to the whole nation of Israel, to Red Sea. He was good to the nation of Israel, to Jordan River. He wasn't too good to the nation of Israel in the wilderness when they all died out that left Egypt, except for those that was under 21 years old. But it wasn't God's fault. They just kept on and on and on and on. They wouldn't accept what God was trying to do. They never accepted him. And I promise you tonight, if you don't accept his blessings, if you don't accept his offer to bless you, then you will never be blessed. And I can promise you that. He said the Lord's good to all, and his tender mercies are over all his works. I'm glad that he's got tender mercy. I'll tell you what, people get under my skin so fast sometimes. I mean, some of the things that people do, you just think, man, what would make somebody act like that? Why would anybody do what they're doing? Some of it, I mean, I'm talking about sinful things. I'm talking about crazy things. I'm talking about ungodly things. I mean, people just, there's no limit to what people will do. But God still loves them. I love them, but I have a problem with that sometimes. I mean, hey, if they want to get saved, I'll try to lead them to Calvary. I'll even try to talk them into wanting to get saved. I'll do whatever I can to try to help them. But you know something? If they don't receive it, I just back off, basically. Maybe I shouldn't do that. That's what I do. But God's not like me. See, God goes home with them. When they go to bed, God stands by the side of the bed. When they get up in the morning, God's still standing there. When they get in their automobile to go to work or go wherever it is they go, God's riding with them. He's always with them because he is so full of grace, mercy, and compassion. And he's so full of love. He said he loved the world, which I'm a part of. And he said he loved me so much that he gave his only begotten Son, and I never deserved it. You look at the worst sinner you can find tonight. That'd be hard to do because we don't know which one it is. There's so many of them. I mean, terrible people. But pick out the worst one you can find and look at them. My wife said something one time I'll never forgot. We was coming down Jackson Avenue in Knoxville. We turned right on Gay Street, and laying on the side of the road on the sidewalk was a woman. She was probably a drug addict, certainly a wino, and who knows what else. Sister Carol saw her and she said, you know, except for the grace of God, that would be me. That would be me. I want to tell you, except for the grace of God, that would be you. Except for the grace of God, that is all of us. It's just God's grace and mercy. It's no wonder that the psalmist started off and said, great is the Lord, greatly to be praised. And his greatness is unsearchable. Listen, God is good. And we need to, if we want things from God, we say, God, I need help with this. Are you praying? Are you talking to him? Are you living for him? Are you acting like you want help with it? Or do you go off and say, I need your help, Lord, and I'll be back maybe in 30 days. Listen, that don't get it. We need to turn our heart and life over to God. Turn our heart and life over to Jesus. Let him bless you. Let Him bless me. Let Him bless our church. Let Him bless our neighborhoods. Let Him bless our city. Let Him bless our nation. There's no limit to what God can do if we, as God's people, would just put our trust in Him and praise His name. David said, great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. And He did all the time. While Miss Christie comes to the piano.